Hey everyone, it's Duncan here, and today we're back with HeadRush to see if we can recreate the iconic guitar tones of Prince using just the Revalver 5 plugin. So to get started, we're going to be taking a look at the track Purple Rain of Prince's 6th studio album, and more specifically, how close we can get to replicating that rhythm and lead guitar tone. Of course, when making a Prince guitar tone video, there was plenty of songs to choose from, but honestly, the reason I picked Purple Rain is my fascination with that intro chordal sequence, and more specifically, how such a guitar tone can become instantly recognizable. It also uses a large amount of vintage chorus and modulation effects, which I thought would be a great challenge to see which pedals in Revalver 5 could handle those style of tones. Plus, Purple Rain is just generally a very fun song to play, so I thought it would be a really cool video to really understand what went into making such an iconic guitar track. So first off, let's start by dissecting this rhythm guitar tone, which is featured across the main chordal sequence in the track. Of course, when we're referencing the rhythm guitar tone within Purple Rain, we're actually referencing Wendy's guitar tone, as she's the incredible guitarist who performed live and on the record. Guitar-wise, Wendy was very famous for using Rickenbacker guitars. Now, I do not personally own a Rickenbacker guitar, so for the sake of this video, we're going to be using my trusty thin line Telecaster in the middle position, and that's going to get us somewhere within the ballpark of that tone. That being said, if you don't own a Rickenbacker guitar, then I'll suggest any semi-hollow guitar with P90 pickups, and that should get you somewhere within the ballpark of the guitar tone. And then you can just adjust that later on with an EQ pedal. So before jumping into the plugin, it's important to know which amps and effects Wendy was using to achieve that Purple Rain guitar tone. There's a really great video on YouTube by the people at Vertex Effects, where they actually had Wendy on board and she discussed what effects pedals and amps she was using to create that Purple Rain guitar tone. Within that video, she referenced using a Mesa Boogie Mark I amplifier and also a Boss CE1 chorus, with another interesting point saying that the whole guitar signal was recorded in mono. Whether or not any additional effects got added in the mixing stage, we don't know, but for the sake of this video, I'm going to be following that same format and style amplifier to create the foundation of our guitar tone. So now that I've opened up a fresh instance of Revalver 5 and loaded in my Purple Rain rhythm guitar tone, let's start with the foundation of the guitar tone, which is this M2 amplifier by HeadRush, and is modelled off the 1982 Mesa Boogie Mark II amplifier. To find it on the plugin is quite simple. You just have to scroll down to add a new module, click on here, and then scroll down and you should find the M2 amplifier there. Cab wise, I found this combination to work really well for me, so the first thing I've done is add a splitter tool down at the bottom, and on the left hand side I've got the HeadRush 2x12 B30 with a dynamic 57, and on the right I've got a 2x12 B30 with the ribbon 121. It's worth noting that I have rolled the bass response on the dynamic 57 just off a little bit. This is just to kind of clear up our overall guitar tone, and on both cabs I have added a 0.10 millisecond delay. Settings wise, starting from left to right, we've engaged the cap mod, and on our volume and master, everything is set at 50%, and EQ wise, I wanted to generally just brighten this overall guitar tone, so presence is boosted, bass is rolled off a little bit, mids and treble are then boosted as well, and reverb is dialed all the way off because we're going to add that later in with an effects pedal. All in all, this is what the riff should sound like with nothing but the amplifier turned on. Next, we've got a few things going on in front of the amplifier. The first one is a compressor pedal. Now this is modelled off the Buddha comp, and I really love this compressor pedal because you can dial it in as subtle or as in your face as you want it to be. For the sake of this tone patch, I'm using the compressor to basically boost our overall signal going into the front of the amplifier, and it's just squishing a little bit of the dynamics for our rhythm guitar tone. Next in the signal chain is I have this chorus pedal, which is modelled off the CE1 chorus from Boss. Obviously this is one of the main pedals referenced by Wendy when recreating that Purple Rain guitar tone, so this was a very easy choice on which chorus to use for this preset. And lastly, I've added a bit of a wild card in here, but we've added an analog delay, but I'm not using it as a delay. What I've done is I've kept the delay, depth, the rate, everything like that down, and we're actually using this just for the drive control. So what I'm trying to do is I'm adding a little bit of tape saturation to our overall guitar tone, just to I guess recreate a little bit of that vintage guitar sound. All in all, this is what the riff should sound like with the pedals and the amplifier turned on. Lastly, and probably one of the most important effects other than the chorus, is going to be our ambience pedals. For this I've done a few things. So the first is I've added an air delay. Now with this I've kept the mix and the rate quite low, and what we're doing here is we're just adding a little bit of width to our rhythm guitar tone. I then have that going into this plate reverb. Now I did test a few different reverbs out and I found that the medium plate in Revalver 5 worked best for this guitar tone. I kept everything fairly standard as it came out the box, but other than that I have increased the decay just a little bit to have a nice tail on the end of our tone. I've also added an EQ up top here, and this is basically just to tame any unwanted frequencies, along with just tonally sculpting our tone to get it more like the reference tracks. That's generally everything I had for this rhythm guitar tone. For the sake of this mix, I kept everything very subtle, so I'll leave this preset patch in the description below, but have a download and play around with the EQ settings depending on which guitar you're using, but this should get you somewhere in the ballpark of the rhythm guitar tone for Purple Rain. Okay, so Prince's solo guitar tone is definitely more emphasized in regards to distortion, along with some reverbs and delay. The chorus is a little less prominent when comparing it to our rhythm guitar tone, but to replicate that sound, I tried to use some live recordings along with the album version of the track. So here's how the solo sounds in context to the full track. Okay, so opening up our solo preset patch, we're going to start with the amplifier, which is the same Mesa Boogie Mark II. But with this, the main difference here is that I've adjusted our volume control. Now what I've done here is I've boosted it to create a nice crunchy foundation to our overall amp sound. EQ has been left fairly similar to our rhythm guitar tone with the adjustment of our treble and our presence. This is basically to tame the highs once we actually kick in our overdrive later on. When listening to a few live records of Prince, you can hear that he uses a lot of distortion, but what I really wanted to do with the amplifier was just create a nice foundation of a guitar tone and then achieve that distortion later on with a drive pedal. Next, let's take a look at the front of the amplifier. Now the front of the amplifier, our compressor, chorus and our tape saturation have been left the same, but we've now added a noise gate and our drive pedal. The drive pedal we're using here is the Anxiety drive, and that's modeled off the full tone OCD drive pedal. We're on the low drive setting here, and basically we're just pushing the level and drive a little bit past 12 o'clock. Depending on the guitar that you have, you might have to adjust these settings, but for the guitar which I have, this kind of worked quite nicely for what I wanted it to do. Here's what the tone should sound like with just the pedals and the amp turned on. Lastly, we have our reverbs and delays behind the amp. Now with this, I kept everything fairly similar to like we had in our rhythm guitar tone, but I mainly adjusted the mix control of our reverb and our delay, and I had to play around until I found the sound that I was happy with. One thing to note is our guitar definitely sounds different soloed than it does in a mix. When I was playing around with the reverbs and delays, I found that it was too washy when I then applied it to the mix. To have a play around depending on your guitar and depending on whether you want to solo it or play it along with a band, you might have to adjust the mix control depending on what you're trying to do it for. With all these effects on the solo tone, this is what it should sound like. So there you have it. That's a quick rundown on how to achieve Prince's Purple Rain rhythm and lead guitar tone using the Revalver 5 plugin from HeadRush. If you'd like to have a go yourself, then there'll be a link in the description below to download a copy of Revalver 5 along with all the preset patches used within this video. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you leave a like, comment and subscribe. It really helps out, plus we've got plenty more tonal challenges on the way. I've been Duncan, and as always, I'll see you all on the next one.